Google Cloud Platform provides managed Kubernetes service called Google Kubernetes Engine or GKE. We can deploy our workloads into GKE. Creating the cluster is very easy in GKE. So one of the requirement will be that our workload should be able to connect to Google Cloud services. For connecting to Google Cloud services, our workload should have permission to connect to those services. GCP provides access to cloud services through IAM roles. So these IAM roles are assigned to IAM users or IAM service accounts. For application to application connectivity, service accounts are used. There are multiple ways we can assign permission to our workload for accessing the cloud services. One of it is this cluster is deployed into compute engines, and the compute engine is having its own service account. We can add IAM roles to that compute engine service account so that any applications or any ports running into those compute engines or those nodes will get all the permissions to connect to cloud services. One of the problem with this approach is if it is a multi-tenant Kubernetes cluster, that means there are many applications which doesn't have any dependency between each of the other applications, and it will have different permissions. In that case, if these two applications are deployed into same VM, both the applications will get the same permission to the cloud services. So we cannot restrict one application from accessing the other applications files in the cloud storage or data in the BigQuery, etc. How we can achieve it? There's another way we can do it. We can have different service accounts for each of the applications, then give permissions to those service accounts. These are the IAM service account I'm talking about. And for each of the IAM service account, we can download the service account key and store it into each application's secret. And application can take keys from its own secret and get all the permissions. One drawback of this one is administrator has to rotate these keys periodically. Another way we can give permission to our Kubernetes workload is using workload identity. This is the Google recommended approach. Here we are going to see how we can set up workload identity for our Kubernetes workload. In workload identity, what we are doing is we'll have a service account for our Kubernetes workload. And there is an IAM service account as well. To IAM service account, we'll provide all the permissions required for our application. Then through few commands, we will link these to service account. So Kubernetes service account will get all the permissions of the IAM service account. Let us see how to do that. I have the Kubernetes cluster here. It is created in a autopilot mode. One of the requirement is workload identity need to be enabled in the cluster. We can see that workload identity is enabled here. And workload identity namespace is this one, our project name .svc.id.google. And I have created a bucket here. Bucket is having two files. In this demo, what we are trying to do is we are trying to list these two files in our application. For listing, it needs sufficient permissions. That's what we are going to see. Let us set the project here. Here I have two manifest files. One is the default deploy and the other one is workload deploy. Default deploy will deploy to the default namespace with a default service account, and it is deploying a image of Google SDK, and it will run a command gsutil list command to that bucket, what we have seen. Let us set up the command line permission. Our application is deployed. It will take some time. Let us wait for that. The application is completed. Now let us see the logs. Here you can see that it's saying that the service doesn't have permission to list the storage bucket. This is what happened when our workload doesn't have permission to access cloud services. Now what we are going to do is we are going to set up a workload identity. For that, what we are going to do is we'll create a namespace in our Kubernetes, then create a service account for that namespace, create a IAM service account. We created a IAM service account. Now we are going to assign role to it. So we are going to assign storage admin role. For our Kubernetes service account to access cloud services, it need to impersonate a IAM service account. So that's what we are going to set here. We are going to build a policy binding between these two service accounts. The role is IAM workload identity user. So we are saying that this service account, Kubernetes service account is having the role workload identity user. Next, what we are going to do is we are going to annotate Kubernetes service account with the email ID of the IAM service account. Now we can see that we created a Kubernetes service account, we created an IAM service account, we added role to IAM service account. That means we added whatever permissions required to that IAM service account. Like here, what we added is storage admin role. Then what we did is we did a policy binding. In the IAM service account, we told Kubernetes service account is a member and it's having the role workload identity user. Then in the Kubernetes, we are annotating our service account with the IAM service account. All the setups are done now. Now what we are going to do is we are going to deploy our application. For deploying the application should be deployed into the namespace my-ns, and it should use the service account kube-sa. So those configurations we'll set it in the manifest file. Here we have added a namespace, that's my-ns. Then the service account is mentioned, which service account to be used, that's kube-sa. Then the node selector, we are saying that whichever node is using the GKE metadata server, that node should be used for the deployment. Rest of the details are the same, and let us deploy this application. Application is created. So application is completed. Let us check the logs. We can see that both the files are listed here. We have the files here. The command was to list the files, and it is listing. It is having our workload is having sufficient permission to list the files in the bucket. This is the way we set up a workload identity for our Kubernetes workload.